For 30 years, we've partnered with CARE to keep girls in school and to help women start their own businesses and gain financial independence. We're proud to support CARE's I'm Every Woman campaign and conversation series in celebration of International Women's Day. We know these discussions will inspire people to build a better, more equal world for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm absolutely thrilled, beyond thrilled to be with all of you here today. The organization does such wonderful work, the dedication to bringing dignity, having women and girls at the core focus of all of this. This is right up my alley and something I'm very proud to be a part of, and proud of the work that you continue to do on behalf of so many people. So thank you for including me in today's conversation. And on International Women's Day, we celebrate and get a chance to do so for every woman, talking about the leaders, the problem solvers, the protectors, the givers, the change makers, so many people who give back to society in so many diverse and wonderful ways. And every week this month, CARE is actually hosting an exciting and insightful series of talks with women who have shown leadership and bravery throughout their entire lives. They remind us to celebrate the power of every woman and the collective strength that will lead us into a stronger, more equal future. And you can join CARE in celebrating International Women's Day by tuning in for these talks, watching our remake of the anthem I'm Every Woman with Shaka Khan and Adina Menzel, and by sending a CARE package to support women around the world at care.org/everywoman. I am honored to lead today's episode, I Am a Leader. It's called, with 4 incredible leaders: Monica Bauer, Nikki Clifton, Julie Pleck, and Asahi Pompey. A little bit about each woman. Monica Bauer is Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Sustainability for PepsiCo Latin America, a region that covers 2 of the company's top markets worldwide. Monica leads the company's internal and external communication strategies, brand communication, as well as the corporate citizenship and sustainability agenda across 34 developing markets. In February of last year, she published the book, The Power of Empowerment: Women Building Latin America. Nikki Clifton, she joins us and leads UPS's global philanthropy, social impact, and the UPS Foundation as part of the company's new corporate affairs, communications, and sustainability team. She oversees efforts to respond to the world's most pressing social, humanitarian, and environmental needs. She has been instrumental in UPS's response to human rights and social justice issues, including spearheading and coordinating UPS's anti-human trafficking awareness engagement. Nikki was also a founding board member of CARE's Global Leaders Network. Julie Pleck joins us as a creator, showrunner, and executive producer, best known as the creator of the Vampire Diaries universe. She founded and leads her own production company, My So-Called Company, and exemplifies what it means to be a strong woman in business. She is committed to powerful storytelling and has consistently connected with worldwide audiences through resonant and compelling content. Asahi Pompey is also here, and she is the global head of corporate engagement and president of the Goldman Sachs Foundation. Under Asahi's leadership, Goldman Sachs's 10,000 Women program has been fostering economic growth by providing women entrepreneurs around the world with a business and management education, mentoring and networking, and access to capital. So please join me in welcoming these very inspirational leaders. I'm glad you're all here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get right into the conversations. I know everyone wants to hear from all of you, and your careers obviously just underscore your brilliance and expertise. So let's begin by a conversation of what's happening in your neck of the woods, shall we say, because, you know, today, CARE and its corporate council are releasing a private sector playbook for gender equality. And one of the most powerful ways that we've seen companies pushing for gender equality is actually in their supply chain chain and their procurement. For example, we've seen companies that require suppliers to have strong gender equality policies or to report to women and in leadership roles, and others prioritize women-owned companies in procurement or women creatives in, say, their ad buys. And so I'm wondering for each of you, and I'll begin with you, Nicole, what compelling trends are you seeing in your workplaces and in your company?
Sure. Thanks so much. I appreciate the question, and thank you to CARE for having me here today. UPS has really proudly supported CARE for 27 years, and we believe that CARE is making such a critical difference in the lives of women and girls around the world. And these significant advancements are things that are really near and dear to the heart of the UPS Foundation, where our mission is to build a safer, more resilient, and inclusive community around the globe. So I'm just thrilled to be here with all of you dynamic women today. In terms of our support for supplier diversity, this is some really great work that I'm proud to say that UPS hasn't just come to the table on. We've been a leader in supporting diverse supplier diversity and advancing efforts in supplier diversity for quite some time. Our vice president for supplier diversity is a dynamic woman named Chris Oswald, and she's really made supplier diversity a key business imperative. And I think that's part of the strategy, that it's not just a nice to do, it's part of a business, comprehensive business strategy with focusing on understanding the investing needs of women-owned businesses, but then also meeting them where they are. So if, for example, we know that COVID has really hit our women-owned businesses in a disproportionate way. And so we've tried to pivot to bring webinars and sessions to women on how to continue to build resiliency, on how to make their pitches, on how to invest in ways that are strategic, because we know that the women-owned businesses are the backbone of our supply chain. We've also really looked at providing scholarships to women-owned executives and women who are on the rise. We've got a partnership with Dartmouth to provide education to women and to ensure that they're getting those critical tools that sometimes the guys get organically. We want to make sure that we're bringing those good learning opportunities directly to women through those sorts of supplier diversity initiatives. We spent over $200 million with women-owned businesses in 2020 alone, and we know we've got work to do, but we are really excited about the opportunities that we're prioritizing to advance the women and women-owned businesses around the globe.
I think that's fascinating and incredible things to do. And I know, Asahi, you're somebody who works in this area and have a great fluency in this idea of women entrepreneurs in particular. Talk to me about what the experience has been in your company, about how you have devoted the resources to attaining these goals as well.
Laura, to your point about dedicating the resources, last January, our CEO, David Solomon, went out to the world and said Goldman Sachs would no longer IPO any company unless it had at least one diverse board member. And that's moving to at least 2 diverse board members this July, of which one of them must be a woman. Now, as we think about sort of the nexus of where each of us sit and where companies and organizations are able to move things forward, it starts with the top. Right? Tone from the top and what happens at the top of the organization. And certainly the board of corporations around the country and around the world really direct where companies very often go from a governance and other perspective. And so we came out with that policy, and it's really created a tremendous amount of discussion around the place of corporations and how corporations can advance gender equity. I'm excited to read CARE's report, and in particular, CARE's work over the last number of years in this area. I'd say a couple of things. When we looked at companies and how companies performed, companies with diverse boards perform better. They're simply more profitable. So I'll give you a stat that I think is pretty striking. 1 year post IPO, companies that had at least one board member saw a 44% increase in their share price, compared to companies that had no diverse board members that had a 13% increase in share price. Now, you and I know, Laura, that lots goes into the share price of a company, but this data cannot be ignored, that having diversity and gender diversity diversity at the very top breaks up that group think that we all know corporations can have from time to time. The kinds of questions that are being asked at the board level that then trickles down to what's being asked in the C-suite, that then goes down to what's being asked throughout the organization in terms of pay, in terms of leave, in terms of flexibility, all the issues that we know are central to impacting the work of women around the world really comes from the very top. And so we're excited about that particular development. Laura, secondly, as you know, we have our 10,000 Women program. For over 13 years, Goldman Sachs has been working with women entrepreneurs around the world. We know that when you help a single woman, that woman then helps her sister, helps employ a man in the community, helps a girl in the community. So that blast radius of helping a single woman entrepreneur helps anywhere from 10 to 15 individuals in a community, because when women lead and when women grow, they help others in their community. And we've seen that time and time again over the last decade of running the program, which we've been able to help over 100,000 women now in 200 countries.
That's fascinating and very empowering to hear. And from somebody who actually, wrote the book on empowerment and understands the power of women's voices in the corporate world and elsewhere. Of course, Monica, I'd love to hear your views, because you actually, you really did write the book on the power of empowerment. So tell me a little bit about what PepsiCo has been doing to support these initiatives and to really further these goals that we have collectively.
Sure, Laura, thank you so much for the opportunity. So I think what you mentioned and the scope of care is spot on. So I think that more than ever, companies now play a critical role as change agents in our world, especially during COVID and post-COVID. So PepsiCo has understood this, and in addition to, of course, taking care and having all the gender policies inside our own workforce, we understand our responsibility, the potential we can create in terms of growth within our supply chain. So just to let you know a little bit about the size of a supply chain, such as the one in PepsiCo LATAM, we employ about 70,000 associates directly, but we employ about 1.3 million of people indirectly. So that's a huge responsibility and also a huge opportunity. In general, the food and beverage industry in our markets really impacts GDP very strongly. So with that in mind, what PepsiCo has been shaping, it's a strategy that really goes across the entire supply chain to make sure we shape policies that really create and trigger systemic change. So I would say that there are a couple of things I'd like to highlight. First of all, it's as an agro-industrial company, women in agro. So we are making sure that we support women in agro through training programs, through financial and technical support, and especially to make sure that we really shape a cultural change within all these women. One of our most important partners in this journey, it's actually CARE. We have committed to a very strong partnership for years to make sure that we eventually can support up to 5 million female farmers. So that's an exciting journey that I would love to then talk to you more about. The second one is women in operations. Again, with such a large footprint, we have to make sure that we adapt programs. We actually have assembly lines that are fully run by women, and that actually creates an amazing result for PepsiCo because of the quality and delivery of women. We also work and have a very strong commitment to women as suppliers. So first of all, we have, as part of our code of conduct and as part of our agreements with suppliers, the need for them to have a diverse representation. But then we also have partnerships with organizations such as We Connect that help us really connect with women suppliers all across the globe. And then very importantly, I would say that like the last piece of our supply chain, it's our customers. And you know that in LATAM, mom and pop stores are very important, and many of them are owned by women. So we're providing all kinds of support, training in this world now, a lot of digitalization that is something that they need, and especially women that have lower access to technology, to make sure that we, again, make an entire footprint of support for women across our supply chain.
That's wonderful to hear. And Julie, I see you nodding, and I'd love to jump in here. We're talking about, of course, entrepreneurs and about the idea of the supply chain and about the idea of corporate America, but you come from a very different world. And I think it's a fascinating one that is so compelling. And I'd love to hear your take on the ideas behind what CARE stands for and how it's translated for you as somebody who owns and runs your own production company and tells these very resonant and compelling tales.
Well, I think, when you think about the supply chain of Hollywood, what that is its content. It is the content we are delivering out to the audience and the messaging that we are building into our content. And I think one of the great things that's happened, born out of a shadow, is after Time's Up and Me Too, you saw a whole lot of change happen real fast. All of a sudden everyone's like, oh God, do we have enough women in this room? And you're like, no, you don't have enough women in this room. And so we got to kind of ride the wave over the last several years of a lot of really powerful progress up, the C-suites and on down. I think the boards still have some work to do. You see a lot more female bosses, a lot more female power position bosses. And what that does is, reflecting what was just said before, when ideas from a position of equality, of feminine power, when those are being presented from the top levels down, they just then support the bottom levels trying to send that messaging back upstairs. And so it is a really beautiful cycle that's really beneficial. But I think one of the things that we as creatives, especially white female creators, always need to remember is that we're all sort of still living in the lingering shadow of what has essentially been a patriarchal system for quite a long time. And so not only is it rising the ladder and fighting for pay equality and diversity and all those things, but it's also shifting our female perspective. We were all taught under what I would call essentially a male gaze of storytelling. And it's actually takes work as a woman to reprogram your own perspective, because it's different than the perspective you were born and raised in this industry with. And that's been a fascinating thing for me to realize that I have to do. And I'm speaking on behalf of other white women in the business, that we have to do, because our work isn't done building ourselves up and building ourselves away from the sort of system that raised us. And I look forward to being able to not just do that as a human being and within my own industry, but also to be able to really reposition the way we tell our stories, and as such, then what content we are putting out there, what our product is. So lots to do, but feeling good about spreading that message.
Well, that's a message worth spreading, and one that we need to consistently do because it's so impactful. And I want to stay for a second on this topic that Julie raised, because when we think about storytelling, and we think about entrepreneurs, and we think about women in valuable positions and in the platforms they're on, we often don't always have the same conversations about valuing the work they're doing, about valuing their impact, about valuing their input or their influence or their skills at a commensurate level as we do with their male counterparts. And so I'd love to speak with each of you. And Nikki, I'll go to you. On the issue of pay equity, which is a very, very big conversation, talk to me about some of the success stories or experiences that might come to mind for you in particular and on behalf of your organization that shows any progress in this area.
Sure. I think it's such a great question, and one that I can proudly say, as an employee at UPS, number one, we routinely do pay equity surveys and salary analyses quite a bit. I came out of our labor and employment group. I was a labor and employment lawyer before I started in the foundation, so it's an area that I'm pretty familiar with. But where I've seen, I think the most recent commitment is from our new CEO, Carol Tomei. We are now led by the first woman CEO at UPS. And we commissioned a corporate-wide pay equity survey right after she joined the company we started a task force called the Equity, Justice, and Action Task Force that was looking at the lived experiences primarily of Black UPSers in the wake of the civil rights and civil unrest. But as part of that task force, our CEO said, we need to make sure that pay equity is at the top of our agenda. And so let's make sure that we're prioritizing that. And so we've operationalized that currently, and it's really opened up an opportunity for women in our organization to talk about their worth and examine their worth, and also recognize that the company does value women across the board. And I'm really optimistic about that. I think it's important to move beyond words. And the action driven from the top, I think, is an important step. The other thing that Carol Tomei did when she came into UPS is to look at the composition of our board. And she has added 5 new directors. 3 of them are women, 2 are African American. And so this just goes back to the earlier points about leading from the top and the importance of having someone in that seat that is not only committed, but is walking the walk early on.
And Nikki, just so I'm clear, when you talk about the surveys, I think people often want to understand what that looks like in practice. Is it a review of the different salaries? Is it a way of ensuring that there is consistency? Is it about reflecting on corporate values and making sure that they are in line with the expectations? Is it very holistic in that sense?
So first of all, we've got multiple ecosystems at UPS. We've got a large unionized workforce. And so from the standpoint of collective bargaining, that group and that analysis is under a collective bargaining agreement. And so it's a little bit different from a pay equity standpoint, because their salaries and their pay is according to the collective bargaining scale. Our look at the salary review from the corporate wide standpoint is really a holistic view at how women are being paid commensurate to men in other jobs. We've got outside counsel that have come in and taken a look at the review, and then also bringing our talent management team in place to ensure that we're looking at it from a holistic standpoint, looking at mentoring opportunities, looking at sponsorship opportunities, because honestly, it's not just about the hard dollars. It's also about training and education, making sure that people feel like they've got a voice and that they've got mentors and sponsors, which in my view are 2 very different things. The mentors are someone who are going to come along and really help and assist your career, but the sponsor is the person who's going to really give you lift and put their credibility on the line for you. And so part of this analysis is making sure that our whole talent management system is supporting the equitable access of women and people of color throughout our organization.
Thank you. And Monica, do you have some similar sort of success stories or parameters in place to make sure that there is a way to have this holistic opportunity to review, to be in line with the value system that I know you care very deeply about?
That is correct, Laura. What we do is at PepsiCo is we pay a lot of attention to pay equity. It's critical to ensuring diversity. So currently, and it's a number I'd like to share with you, we're very proud to say that our recent analysis tell us that now currently at PepsiCo, men and women are paid within a 1% of each other. This happens in 69 countries that represent most of 99% of our salaried employee population. So that's something that we pay attention very close to make sure that this is just progressing. Another thing we do is very important to also understand and have advice from outside. So we're currently an endorser of the United Nations Women's Empowerment Principle, and we're also part of Catalyst. So we are continue feeding our strategy with a lot of external input. So the other part of your question that was, okay, what happens also to gender parity? That's also we also take very seriously. We have public targets, and I'm very proud to say that, the target for 2025 is to have a 50-50 women and men in leadership positions globally. So as of today, we have achieved globally 41% of women in management roles, and specifically in Latin America, 50% of our executive committee, it's comprised of women. Progress done, definitely much more to do, but how we're driving this is by a very robust and integral strategy that is really paying attention to this all time long. So this is not only about recruiting, this is really about accompanying women all the way. So we do have a component on recruiting that it's very important to have candidates from every single representation. So then we have the second component that it's after talent attraction, that it's talent development. So then when we now have the talent, how do we develop the talent? What are the specific programs, because in many cases these should be tailored to specific audiences. If you're a woman in STEM, if you're a woman in operations, if you're a woman in sales, if you're someone in a managerial position, the tailoring, it's very important. So a lot of leadership and functional training, it's just part of the development you get at PepsiCo. And then the third one that it's, I think, very relevant, especially now that we've seen like those third and fourth shifts of women, now with all of the unpaid work they do, but now taking care of the children at home and sometimes also as caregivers of other parts of the family, that it's talent retention. So for long, we have been working on flexible programs to make sure that our associates really can have work-life balance and achieve that as part of a priority. So what we do is, it's flex time policies, flexible location, maternity policies, among many others. So I think it's critical to understand that these three planks are the ones that really will take us and have taken us so far to the numbers I shared in terms of gender parity.
Asahi, I'd love for you to weigh in on this issue as well, because I know that this is something that you also specialize in. Are there similar metrics or success stories that you'd like to share?
I share a very sobering statistic. In this country, there is an over 90% wealth gap between a Black woman and a white man. Right? Over 90% wealth gap. And then you think about how does that wealth gap pay out in terms of the kinds of opportunities that are then available to that family, to the children raised in that household, to their job prospects, and how through the arc of life, from sort of even maternal care that's available to the school, to the job opportunity, to the college, all of that, how that then plays out and really impacts across that whole spectrum. And so there are a couple of things that, Goldman Sachs has done. One is, in particular, our Launch with Goldman Sachs program. This is a for-profit initiative, a $500 million commitment to fund women-led companies and women portfolio managers, because there's venture capital out there, billions of dollars of venture capital. Women are getting less than 1% of that venture capital. And so this is an effort to say, we're going to back women-led companies, women founders, and help those businesses to grow, because we know those women employ a diverse group of individuals and really can propel and grow their business and frankly strengthen our capital markets as we go. And so we know that people listen to what you say, but they really judge you by what you do. And with this $500 commitment launch at Goldman Sachs, it's really around developing women-led companies and founders to really sort of propel them in the capital market system.
Very important. And of course, we have a woman-led business. Julie, I want to go to you here. And I wonder, in your perspective, when you think about pay equity and you're thinking about it as the person who is the head and the one to make a lot of these decisions, how are you grappling with these issues? I know you mentioned already the idea of Time's Up and the Hollywood pay equity issues that have already been very well discussed, but not quite enough. What are your thoughts in this area?
Well, I think, not to be a broken record about the system in which we were all blossomed, but I think one of the other things that somebody like me was taught was by family, by my men, which is, you don't talk about money, you don't talk about that. That's rude. Don't ask about money. Don't ask about what somebody makes. And so that we're conditioned to avoid those conversations. And yet really one of the keys to pay equality is transparency of pay. And one of the things that happened recently in Hollywood, which is an interesting development, is that the Writers Guild basically stood up, took a stand against the agencies and said, you cannot represent us as writers until you follow some new rules that we're bringing to the table. One of which is we need our contracts to be shared with the guild so that the guild can see across the board who's making what, because that, pay scale in Hollywood is one of the, best and worst kept secrets, but the data was never easily mineable for the Writers Guild specifically. And so in winning that battle, suddenly now the Writers Guild is putting out average salaries, weeklies, this, base scale stuff, whatever the information it is that its members need, they now have direct access to it. And while we were waiting for that to happen, I was in a bunch of writers' rooms in which we as women were like, hey, what did you make for that? Do you mind sharing? And somebody be like, oh, I don't mind sharing at all. I made this and you should ask for this. And if they tell you they're not going to give you this, then they're lying because I know that that person made that. And being able to have an open dialogue is really half the battle. And yes, there's a lot of, controversy that comes with that. But the bottom line is knowing what your peers are getting paid for the same work in an environment that is not a corporate environment where those things are publicly transparent, I think has really made a difference and will continue to make a difference in Hollywood. And then again, the way that we then can pay that forward is by combating the next problem in our culture and in our specific business in Hollywood, which is that because it's historically been a pay your dues kind of business, get in at the bottom, work your way up kind of business, and yet our bottom currently does not provide anything remotely resembling a living wage in any community, much less the Los Angeles community. So I think what we now, as we make gains towards pay equality, need to then also focus our energy forward into how do we reduce some of the barriers to entry to people that weren't raised and aren't funded by family, that don't have that kind of financial freedom to come in and work for $420 a week and all those things. People of color who aren't getting sort of trotted in from a generational wealth family that can pay their bills. And so what I'm looking forward to is not just continuing to double down on the fight for progress for women and their equity within this industry, but also to then say, okay, well, we've been fighting our own game pretty well. So now let's continue to fight for women of color, for people from communities that don't present clear paths into this industry.
I think it's so important what you said, this idea of the transparency. And I think people can recoil oftentimes at transparency. They desperately want it in one arena and they recoil for competitive reasons because it's just a taboo topic. But until we actually have transparency and people understand how their worth, so to speak, is being quantified and the metrics that are being used, it's very difficult to engage in discussions about parity and equity unless you have the actual data in front of you. And one of the areas that comes to mind, I'm a mother, I have 2 young children, and so many of my colleagues have had this conversation, and across the globe, women everywhere are having this conversation because we know the role that women have played as often the primary caretakers of children in their homes. And you think about the idea of the roadblocks that can be in people's place that can undermine their career trajectory, or they're making the choice, as Julia spoke about, making the choice between a non-livable wage that can't support themselves, let alone their families, or saying, I'm ambitious, but I need to leave the workplace for a variety of reasons. My children are a primary concern, obviously. So I wonder, what are your different companies doing, and what can companies do to try to alleviate some of these burdens of the roadblocks that we know not only existed pre-COVID, but with the COVID-19 pandemic and distance learning has really exacerbated the need to really address this head on? Monica, can you start?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I also have 2 small children, so it's really very, very intense. Now, I would just like to first highlight a couple of facts from LATAM that are really striking and very, very sad. So the International Labor Organization tells us that in LATAM, women do more than 75% of the total hours of unpaid work. So, for example, in Mexico, an average woman does 42 hours of unpaid work per week. That's dramatic, no? And if we just bring this to COVID and to the current scenario, that's why they're referencing all this recession. You probably heard the term, but it's just striking that it's the recession because of the impact that this will have on women. And as you just said, it's the effect of the pandemic, the potential millions of women in the region below the poverty line, but it's also many women downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce completely because of such a burden and so much work. So we take this very seriously at PepsiCo. As I mentioned before, as part of our retention strategy, we already had in place many different policies regarding flexibility, etc. But we definitely activated a number of programs geared towards all these women to support them during the pandemic. So I would mention a couple. First of all, more flexibility, childcare support, and also educational support. Then in North America, this also includes things like preferred enrollment at Bright Horizons childcare centers, and also some tutoring options at discounted rates, very important for the families. And then outside, we also have other things like enhanced maternity leave policies, more flexibility in work hours, entertainment for children at home. We did some summer camps, and we also are paying a lot of attention on mental health and well-being. So we have different programs, we have a support line, and many things to make sure that on a tailored approach, market by market, we support women along the way, especially during these difficult times.
That's incredible. Asahi?
You know, similar to you and Monica, Laura, I also have 2 small kids, 2 boys. So I have a very active life with my 2 boys. And, you know, one of them went back to school in person for the first time last Friday. And so that gives you a sense of what my life's been like, you know, over the last year. And, you know, what corporations and I think just industry needs to do in general is a lot of the things that I think Monica really clearly describes. But I put it under the umbrella of 2 things. One is ask your employees, right? The women who work for you, with you, will gladly tell you, here are the kinds of things that I need, whether, you know, it's longer maternity leave, whether it's, you know, stipends as it relates to adoption and surrogacy, you know, whether it's greater flexibility more generally. And so really engage in that dialogue around understanding that the needs are there, as Monica pointed out in terms of the data, as well as do something about it when they say, these are the structures that I need in place to be able to perform at my best. And so that trifecta, I think, of really sort of listening to people, providing the flexibility, and then doubling down on those efforts, I think is one way in which to really sort of meet the moment, if you will. One statistic, in September alone, women dropped out of the workforce at 4 times the rate of men. And so on the one hand, we've got corporations saying we need greater diversity and we're going to push for that. But on the other hand, we're having women just dropping out of the workforce. So how are you ever going to get to this goal unless you deal with the fact that women need greater flexibilities and structures in place to be able to manage and continue and advance? And by the way, I'll say this for corporations, when you do that, you have an extremely loyal and committed employee who's then able to, you know, be more productive, more efficient, mentor other women, be a sponsor, as Nikki pointed out, to other individuals throughout the corporation. And so in terms of the give back on doing these, the data is clear, it's unequivocally there, and it's a matter of making sure that we're doing that across the board.
And Nikki?
I was just going to add in, just in addition to the things that the wonderful panelists have said, that as women are rising in the ranks, right, as we are becoming leaders in our organizations, I also think it's important for us to really model what we know other women and other men, frankly, need from a flexibility standpoint. I have the privilege of working for a woman, and she also works for our CEO. And when I think about some of the conversations that we've had, I have 4 children between my husband and I. And, you know, it's one of those things where when you're able to talk to someone to say, you know, okay, the meetings, we don't need the meetings to start, you know, until after 9 o'clock or 9:30 a.m. because I'm taking my kids to school and we want to make sure that we have that family time, or maybe no meetings after 5:30 p.m. or maybe you get back online at a certain time in the evening after the kids have gone on down. I think it's important to have those kinds of conversations and to model that behavior also so that our men can be allies in that way. I think that when women are speaking up and saying, here's how we need to change the culture, and it works, and all of a sudden guys realize, well, they've got more free time to do things that they need to do. And as we're starting to take care of our parents, we've got aging parents and siblings and things of that nature through COVID-19 and just life in general, I think women can go a long way as leaders in modeling that behavior and being very vocal about modeling those success stories while holding people accountable. And we like to call it this flexibility with accountability. I think that's important. It goes a long way into being able to help create the type of environment that women and men need to flourish in.
Ladies, I want to close this round of questioning. There's been audience members who've asked these questions as well, but I want to just quickly get your one sentence answer to these. And I know we want to hear from you and you have so much compelling things to say. Each of you, please complete this sentence for me. I believe every woman can lead by. Monica?
I believe that every woman can lead by using her own power to empower other women.
Nikki?
I believe that every woman can lead by being her authentic self and using her voice.
Julie?
I believe that every woman can lead by having the perspective that just because what they went through made them strong, they don't have to inflict that on the next generation. They can actually be the change for the next generation.
Asahi?
I believe every woman can lead by bringing men along to lead with us in advancing gender equity.
Ladies, what a fascinating conversation and what a real pleasure it is to have a chance to speak to each and every one of you. I want to thank you so much for being a part of this, and what a terrific way to celebrate International Women's Day. Powerful women, powerful insights, and an inspiration for all of us. There is so much that we can do together for equality, from the boardroom to the most marginalized communities in the entire world. So thank you, Monica and Nikki and Julie and Asahi, for your leadership that drive these movements, and also your continued support of marginalized and vulnerable people. Please visit care.org /everywoman, care.org/everywoman to check out the campaign. There's an exciting music video of the song I'm Every Woman, and you can send a care package to support women around the world who are standing up to build back a stronger future. I'm also excited to tell you about the launch of the CARE Corporate Council's Gender Equality Playbook for Business we mentioned. This website tool is intended to be a useful resource for business leaders in all functions, and we hope to take the time to view it and learn what steps companies can take to achieve gender equality in the field, in the factory, in the supply chain, in the community, and beyond. And thank you for all of you for joining us today as we seek a world of hope, inclusion, and social justice, where poverty has been overcome and all people live with dignity and security. Thank you.
Thank you.